For 4 months, the sensors on Skinwalker Ranch logged nothing but silence, wind, temperature, background radiation. The slow, uneventful heartbeat of 512 acres of empty desert in Utah's Uinta Basin. Night after night, the equipment recorded exactly what you'd expect from a stretch of land like any other: ridges, waterways, sagebrush, and quiet. Then one morning, the data told a different story. If your own backyard suddenly gave off readings like this, would you want to know what caused it? Or would some part of you rather not know at all? And before we go any further, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know exactly how far this story is about to travel. This isn't a ghost story. It's not folklore passed down over a campfire, and it's not a legend dressed up for television ratings. This is about a man with a very specific set of credentials, pointing very expensive, very precise instruments at a very specific piece of land, and getting results that, by his own account, he still can't fully explain. His name is Dr. Travis Taylor. And before you ever heard his voice on a History Channel broadcast, he was doing something far less public. He was working for the Pentagon. Let's establish who we're actually talking about, because it matters. This isn't a paranormal enthusiast with a flashlight and a theory. Travis Taylor is an aerospace engineer holding multiple advanced degrees, with a career built around advanced propulsion systems, space-based technology, and classified defense programs. He spent decades working alongside NASA and the Department of Defense, the kind of resume that earns security clearances, not sensational headlines. In 2019, that resume led him somewhere unexpected. Taylor became chief scientist for the Pentagon's Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, a group most Americans had never heard of, quietly analyzing incidents that defense officials themselves couldn't identify. Fast-moving objects, no visible propulsion, encounters logged by trained Navy pilots, not internet hobbyists chasing lights in the sky. That work fed directly into the 2021 report delivered to Congress, a document that, for the first time, forced the U.S. government to publicly acknowledge it had no explanation for dozens of aerial encounters involving military personnel. That's not speculation. That's a matter of public record. So when a man with that background walked away from classified aerial phenomena and turned his attention to a piece of land in Utah, people paid attention. Because to understand why he went there, you have to go back further than Travis Taylor. You have to go back to a family, a decade before he ever arrived, who wanted nothing to do with any of this. In the 1990s, the property belonged to the Sherman family, ordinary ranchers trying to run cattle on ordinary land. What they described instead was anything but ordinary. Unexplained lights moving low over the fields, animals found dead without visible wounds, and a mounting sense that something on their own property was actively hostile to their presence. Their account eventually reached a Las Vegas newspaper, and from there, it reached someone with the means to actually investigate it. Robert Bigelow was a real estate magnate and aerospace entrepreneur, with a long-standing private fascination with the unexplained. In 1996, he purchased the ranch from the Shermans for a reported $200,000. Not as a personal retreat, but as a research site. Bigelow founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, assembled a team that included retired law enforcement and PhD-level scientists, and turned the property into something between a research station and a fortress. Cameras, motion sensors, round-the-clock surveillance. Public access was shut down entirely. For nearly a decade, that team quietly logged what they encountered. And what came out of that period is frankly, one of the strangest parts of this entire story. The phenomena, whatever it actually was, seemed to behave as though it knew it was being watched. Investigators repeatedly described events as camera shy, vivid to the observers on the ground, but absent or ambiguous the moment recording equipment was actually pointed at it. One of the researchers involved in that era, Colm Keller, later co-wrote a detailed account of the investigation and was candid about its limits. Years of focused effort had produced very little in the way of conclusive physical evidence. That's an important detail to sit with, because this story has never been short on witnesses. It has been short on proof. By 2004, Bigelow's Institute had wound down its active fieldwork. But what most people didn't know at the time was that the ranch's story wasn't over. It was about to attract a different kind of attention entirely. In 2007, with backing from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and 2 other senators, the Defense Intelligence Agency quietly funded a $22 million program known as the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. Publicly, it was described as research into advanced aerospace threats. In practice, according to later reporting and FOIA disclosures, its scope was considerably broader, encompassing military UFO encounters, theoretical propulsion concepts, and unexplained phenomena. Bigelow's aerospace company won the contract to run it, and Skinwalker Ranch became one of its documented field sites. For years, that connection stayed almost entirely out of public view. It surfaced gradually through investigative journalism and government disclosures, revealing that a strange ranch in rural Utah had, at some point, become a genuine point of interest for a Pentagon-funded research program. Whatever you think that means, it happened. It's documented. In 2016, ownership of the ranch quietly changed hands again, though the identity of the new buyer wasn't revealed for years. In 2020, Utah real estate Brandon Fugel came forward as the owner. And with that, the modern chapter of this story began. Fugel didn't want another decade of quiet, restricted fieldwork. He wanted the investigation brought into the open, documented in real time with real scientific rigor. And that is the environment Dr. Travis Taylor stepped into. Taylor didn't walk onto that property looking for ghosts. He walked in looking for baselines, the unglamorous, methodical readings you need before you can ever claim something is abnormal. You cannot identify an anomaly if you don't first know, with precision, what normal looks like. So the team spread electromagnetic detectors, radiation counters, and surveillance equipment across the property. Weeks of quiet monitoring, establishing what the land does when nothing unusual is happening at all. And then, according to Taylor's own account, something in the data broke pattern. An area the team now calls the Triangle began producing electromagnetic spikes in the 1.6 gigahertz range, the same frequency band used by radar and GPS systems. These weren't constant. They surged, then vanished, without an identifiable source. No nearby transmitter, no equipment malfunction the team could isolate, no obvious explanation. In one of the more publicized tests, the team launched rockets to study anomalies at altitude. At roughly 40,000 feet, ground radar locked onto something stationary, motionless, in a way aircraft simply aren't. The Federal Aviation Administration reported no registered craft in that airspace, and yet the radar had a return. Something was there, according to the instruments. The cameras pointed at the same coordinates. Meanwhile, captured nothing at all. Think about what that actually means if the readings are accurate. Something showed up on radar with no visual signature. Either it wasn't reflecting light the way a physical object typically would, or it wasn't present in any conventional sense the cameras could register. Taylor's own description of the broader pattern was blunt. This wasn't just strange, it behaved as though it understood how to avoid detection. That's the detail that should give you pause. Not the lights, not the folklore. The idea that whatever is producing these readings appears to respond specifically to the act of being observed. It's the same camera-shy pattern researchers described decades earlier, under Bigelow's team, showing up again, this time under far more sophisticated instrumentation and far more public scrutiny. It also helps to understand exactly how different Taylor's approach is from what came before him, because the methodology itself is part of the story. The NIDS era, for all its resources, was largely reactive. A team stationed on the property, waiting for something to happen, then trying to document it after the fact, with whatever cameras and sensors happened to be pointed in the right direction at the right moment. It produced a mountain of witness testimony and comparatively little hard data, in large part because the phenomena, whatever it was, kept slipping past the equipment. Taylor's team, by contrast, was built around a different premise entirely. Instrument the entire property continuously. Establish rigorous statistical baselines across every measurable variable, and treat any deviation as a data point to be investigated methodically rather than a story to be told. It's the same discipline he'd have applied to any classified aerospace threat assessment. Strip out the narrative, isolate the signal, and only then ask what it might mean. That's precisely why the 1.6 gigahertz spikes and the unexplained radar lock carry more scientific weight than 3 decades of prior witness accounts combined. They weren't reported after the fact by someone standing in a field. They were captured, time-stamped, and cross-referenced by instruments that had already spent weeks proving what nothing happening looks like on that exact patch of land. So what do we actually do with information like this? There are a few honest paths forward, and none of them involve pretending we already have a final answer, because we don't. The first possibility is the most mundane, and it deserves real consideration. Instrument error, environmental interference, natural electromagnetic phenomena rare enough to look extraordinary to an observer unfamiliar with them. Deserts produce unusual atmospheric effects. Sensitive equipment drifts and misfires, especially over long, unattended deployments. Skeptics within the scientific community, like longtime UFO researcher Robert Schaffer, have pointed to the ranch's decades of investigation and noted just how little independently verified evidence has actually emerged from any of it. And that critique deserves a place in this story, not a footnote. The second possibility is that the electromagnetic activity has a source that simply hasn't been identified yet. Something geological, something atmospheric, something that exists in nature but hasn't been mapped or understood in this particular configuration. Science has a long history of dismissing phenomena as myth simply because no one had built the right instrument to study them properly. Ball lightning was treated as folklore for well over a century before physicists began taking it seriously. The third possibility is the one that keeps this story alive in the public imagination. That whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch isn't a documented natural process at all. That it's something genuinely outside the current scientific framework, technological or otherwise, and that a man who once analyzed unexplained aerial encounters for the Pentagon may now be documenting something equally unexplained, this time far closer to the ground than the sky. Taylor himself has walked a careful line publicly. He's described experiencing things during these investigations that he personally can't fully account for. Equipment malfunctions with no clear cause, gaps in time he can't reconstruct. But he's also consistently framed his role as a scientist first. Data over conclusions, measurement over belief. In an environment full of people eager to declare answers, he has largely refused to. That tension is exactly why this story hasn't gone away. Not the lights, not the legends. A credentialed government scientist standing on a piece of land with a 30-year documented history of strangeness, refusing to either dismiss it or confirm it. Before we get to what we know for certain, there's more to this timeline worth sitting with, because the ranch's connection to official Washington runs deeper than a single contract. The Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program wasn't the only government thread tied to this story. Around the same period, a related but separate Pentagon effort, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was quietly examining military encounters with unidentified aircraft. Its existence became public in December 2017 when the New York Times published an investigation revealing that the Defense Department had spent years studying reports from military pilots describing objects that outmaneuvered, outran, and outclimbed anything in the American arsenal. The man who ran that program, Luis Elizondo, later resigned from the Pentagon specifically to draw public attention to what he called inadequate seriousness about the subject inside the government. That single piece of reporting changed the entire conversation. Overnight, UFOs stopped being a punchline and started being a subject senators asked about on the record. And Skinwalker Ranch, quietly, had already been named in some of the associated program documentation years before most of the country had ever heard the word ODSAP. Harry Reid, the senator who helped secure the original funding, didn't walk any of it back later on. On the record, in interviews after leaving office, he said plainly that he considered the ranch relevant to the broader question of unidentified aerial phenomena, a position that carries weight, given that Reid had access to briefings most of us will never see. Then there's the testimony that doesn't come from instruments at all. It comes from people. Fife Symington, a former governor of Arizona, spent time at the ranch as part of its research history and has described watching a massive, glowing, triangular object move silently across the sky above the property. No engine sound, no visible means of propulsion. Just a shape and a silence that, by his account, felt wrong. Symington is not a fringe figure. He's a former state governor, on the record, describing something he says he personally witnessed. None of this, on its own, proves anything supernatural or extraterrestrial. But taken together, it paints a picture of a location that has consistently pulled in credentialed, skeptical, professionally cautious people, ranchers, retired law enforcement, PhD researchers, a sitting U.S., senator's staff, a former governor, and now a Pentagon UAP scientist, and left nearly all of them describing something they didn't expect to find. It's worth pausing here to give the skeptics their full due, because a documentary that only tells one side of this isn't documenting anything. Colm Kelleher, who spent years inside the NIDS investigation itself, was explicit that despite sustained, well-funded effort, the team never obtained physical evidence that could be considered conclusive proof of anything unusual. That's not a dismissal from an outsider. That's an admission from someone who was there, embedded in the research, for nearly a decade. Robert Schaefer, a longtime UFO researcher and skeptic, has gone further, arguing that the government's documented interest in the ranch reflects institutional curiosity rather than validated evidence of anything anomalous, and suggesting that much of what's described as phenomena may ultimately prove illusory once subjected to rigorous, independent review. That skepticism matters, and it should sit right alongside everything else in this story, not beneath it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of Skinwalker Ranch. The witness record is genuinely extensive, and by most accounts, sincere. NID staff, the Sherman family, Bayass researchers, and now television-era investigators have all logged strange lights, unexplained animal deaths, and equipment failures across nearly 30 years. But sincerity has never been the same thing as verification. To date, no photograph, video, or sensor log from the property has been independently authenticated by outside scientists as depicting something outside known, explainable phenomena. That gap between how many credible people say they've experienced something and how little of it has survived rigorous outside scrutiny is exactly the space Dr. Travis Taylor now occupies. He's not the first scientist to stand in it. He's simply the most recently qualified one, arriving with a resume that includes literally advising the United States Congress on unidentified phenomena and choosing to point that same rigor at a plot of land that has quietly humbled nearly everyone who has tried to explain it before him. Here's what we know for certain. A real scientist with a real Pentagon background working on a property with a documented paper trail running through a private research institute, a Defense Intelligence Agency program, and now a nationally broadcast investigation, pointed real instruments at real land, and recorded electromagnetic activity that, to this day, has no confirmed explanation. Here's what we don't know. Whether that activity originates from something natural that science simply hasn't cataloged yet, whether it's something technological, terrestrial, or otherwise, or whether the honest answer is that we're not yet equipped to even properly ask the question. Taylor has said the investigation is ongoing. The instruments are still out there tonight, in the dark, logging baselines the way they have for years, waiting quietly for the pattern to break again. Maybe it already has. If you had to choose right now, a natural explanation we simply haven't found yet, or something we genuinely don't have a name for, which one would you bet on? Tell me in the comments. And if this is the kind of mystery you want more of, you already know exactly what to do next.